It was a quiet Friday night, and the streets of the small city seemed almost empty. Most people had already gone home after a long week, the kind of week that leaves everyone wishing for a few hours of peace. The air was cool and carried a hint of rain, though the clouds were scattered and moving slowly across the sky. Officer Ramirez drove slowly down the familiar streets, keeping an eye out for anything unusual, as he always did. Nights like this could feel calm and safe, but in his experience, that calm could vanish in a heartbeat. He knew that trouble often showed up when he least expected it. The routine of patrolling was something Ramirez had gotten used to. He'd been on the force for years, and over time he had developed an instinct, a kind of sixth sense, about situations that might turn dangerous. But even the most experienced officers could be caught off guard. That night, as he rounded a corner near the edge of the city, he noticed a car parked awkwardly under the dim light of a street lamp. The car's engine was off, but the headlights flickered on and off for a moment, casting strange shadows along the nearby sidewalk. Something about it made Ramirez pause, slowed his cruiser, watching the vehicle from a distance, his mind already running through possibilities. He squinted through the windshield, trying to make sense of what he saw. The car was old, not one of the flashy models he was used to seeing in the city, and it was parked in a spot that didn't make sense. It was close to a convenience store that had been closed for hours, the kind of place that usually only saw traffic during the day. Yet here was this car, seemingly abandoned or at least out of place. Ramirez's hand instinctively went to the radio on the dashboard as he called in a description of the vehicle. He reported its make, model, and license plate number, all while keeping his eyes on it. The car remained still, but the faint movement of a figure inside caught his attention. The driver shifted in the seat, and for a moment it looked like they were fiddling with something on the dashboard. Ramirez's mind raced. He had just received a call earlier in the evening about a stolen vehicle, and the description matched this one almost exactly. The thought that someone might be trying to hide in a car, possibly involved in theft or worse, made his pulse quicken. He reminded himself to stay calm, to follow procedure, and to keep the situation under control. He had learned early in his career that rushing or assuming too much could lead to mistakes as he approached. Ramirez noticed small details that made him more cautious. The car's windows were tinted, but he could still see the outline of a person sitting inside. The figure didn't appear aggressive, but there was a tension in the way they held themselves. Their hands were resting on the steering wheel, but there was a slight trembling, subtle enough that someone not paying attention might miss it. Ramirez's training kicked in. He remembered lessons from his instructors about body language, about how small movements could reveal intentions. He had seen criminals try to appear calm before, only for their nervous energy to give them away. He was careful, keeping his cruiser slightly angled, leaving himself a way to retreat if needed. The night felt quieter than usual, almost as if the city itself was holding its breath. Ramirez could hear the faint hum of distant traffic, the occasional neat bark of a dog in the distance, and the soft whisper of wind through the trees lining the street. Every sound seemed louder against the silence of the night, and Ramirez used it to his advantage, alert to anything unusual. He was aware that being alone on patrol could make a situation feel more intense.
Ow.
There was no immediate backup, and while the radio connected him to others, it could take minutes for assistance to arrive if something went wrong. The figure in the car made a slight movement again, and Ramirez took a careful step closer, his hand resting lightly on the holster of his sidearm, though he wasn't planning to draw it unless necessary. He called out in a calm but firm voice, identifying himself as a police officer and asking the driver to show their hands. The figure paused, and Ramirez could see their head tilt slightly, as if considering how to respond. There was a moment that stretched out, a moment heavy with anticipation, where everything seemed suspended in time. Ramirez's heart rate increased, but he forced himself to breathe steadily, to remain composed. He had learned that remaining calm was often the difference between a routine stop and a dangerous confrontation. Then the driver's hands moved, slowly and deliberately, reaching toward the glove compartment. Ramirez's pulse quickened again, and he shouted a warning, his voice firm but not aggressive. "Sir, keep your hands where I can see them." The driver froze, and for a moment it seemed like the situation could escalate. Ramirez could feel the adrenaline surging, sharpening his senses. He noticed the driver's eyes flicking to him. Their gaze steady but filled with something he couldn't quite read. There was no fear, no aggression, just an air of careful composure. Ramirez had encountered many people who panicked under pressure, who made sudden movements that could turn a stop dangerous in an instant. This driver was different, as the seconds ticked by. Ramirez realized he needed to get identification to understand who he was dealing with. He instructed the driver to slowly reach into their pocket and retrieve a form of ID. The driver complied, their movements deliberate and controlled, showing no sign of resistance. Ramirez's eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of what he saw. The ID wasn't the typical driver's license he expected. Instead, a glint of gold caught his eye, and he saw a badge-like emblem that he couldn't immediately identify. Ramirez's mind raced. He had been in situations where people presented fake IDs, but something about this felt different. The driver's calm demeanor suggested they were confident they were in the right. Ramirez kept his tone steady, though inside he was questioning his assumptions. He reminded himself that appearances could be deceiving, that not everything was as it seemed. His training emphasized caution but also fairness. He had been taught to expect the unexpected, yet even with years of experience, surprises could still come. He moved a step closer, maintaining a safe distance, and prepared to verify the ID with dispatch if necessary. He knew that the night was far from over, that this interaction could go in any number of directions. He had to be ready for whatever came next. The driver finally presented the ID fully, and Ramirez took a closer look. His eyes widened as he recognized the emblem for what it was: a judicial badge. The realization hit him like a wave. This wasn't a criminal or a thief. This was someone who held authority, someone who commanded respect in the legal system. Ramirez felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. He had assumed the worst based on circumstantial evidence and prior reports, but here was a respected judge, completely innocent of any wrongdoing. The tension that had built up over the past minutes began to ease, replaced by a sense of humility and surprise. Ramirez's mind replayed the moments leading up to this discovery. He thought about the assumptions he had made, the way his training and experience had guided his actions, and how quickly he had jumped to conclusions. It was a reminder that even the most careful officers could misinterpret situations. He reminded himself that humility was an important part of his job, that acknowledging mistakes and learning from them was essential. The night had been quiet, but it had taught him a lesson in vigilance, perception, and the human tendency to assume the worst. The judge spoke calmly, introducing himself and explaining why he had stopped there. He had pulled over to take a private phone call related to an ongoing case and didn't want to answer it while driving. His tone was polite, measured, and confident, reinforcing the fact that he was in no danger and in no way trying to hide or evade the law. Ramirez listened, nodding and processing the situation. The realization that his assumptions had been incorrect didn't diminish his respect for the law or his commitment to duty. But it did make him reflect on the importance of patience and careful observation. As Ramirez prepared to verify the judge's identity with dispatch, he felt a wave of relief mixed with lingering embarrassment. He had been ready for confrontation, had assumed criminal intent, and had approached the situation with the mindset of potential danger. Yet here was a person of authority, calm and composed, completely innocent. The experience reminded him that human beings were complex, that assumptions could mislead even the most seasoned professionals, and that patience and attention to detail were essential qualities in law enforcement. It was a night that would stay with him, a story he would remember for years. Not because of danger, but because of the lesson in humility and careful judgment. The tension slowly lifted as Ramirez spoke to the judge one last time before resuming his patrol. The city streets were still quiet, but he felt a renewed sense of awareness and respect for the unpredictability of human behavior. The night had started like any other, routine and calm, but it had transformed into a subtle lesson in perception, patience, and the complexity of judging a situation too quickly. Ramirez drove on, his mind reflecting on the delicate balance between vigilance and assumption, and the importance of seeing people clearly beyond appearances. In the quiet stillness of a Friday night, the night air felt heavier now, as if the quiet streets were holding their breath. Officer Ramirez kept his cruiser parked a few feet away from the car, his senses on high alert. Even though he had realized the driver wasn't a threat, there was still a lingering tension. He had learned that first impressions could be misleading, but caution was always necessary. As he approached the car again, he noticed the way the driver's eyes followed his movements. There was calmness there, but also an awareness. A subtle confidence that reminded Ramirez this was someone used to authority and responsibility. The driver slowly rolled down the window, the motion smooth and deliberate. The dim glow from the streetlight reflected off the dashboard and illuminated part of the driver's face. Ramirez could see the faint lines of concentration. The way the jaw tightened slightly, as if thinking through each word before speaking. The officer cleared his throat, keeping his tone calm and professional. "Good evening, sir. I'm Officer Ramirez. Can you tell me why you stopped here?" The driver nodded slightly, meeting Ramirez's gaze directly. "Good evening, officer. I needed to take a call. I didn't want to answer it while driving." There was no hesitation in the voice, no defensive tone, just a straightforward explanation. Ramirez studied the man carefully, noting the way his hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, relaxed but ready to move if necessary. The driver's demeanor told a story of composure under pressure, the kind of self-control that came from years of experience in high-stakes situations. Ramirez nodded, acknowledging the explanation but keeping a watchful eye. His training reminded him that people could be nervous or startled, and even innocent people could react unpredictably. But there was something about the calm confidence of the driver that made Ramirez realize this was not a person to be feared. The night had started with suspicion, with assumptions based on appearances. But now those assumptions were being challenged. Ramirez felt a mix of relief and curiosity. Wanting to understand more about the person he had mistakenly suspected, the driver reached into a pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. He handed it to Ramirez, who recognized immediately that it wasn't just any notebook, it was an official item carefully maintained. "I keep my schedule and important contacts here," the driver explained. "I like to be organized, even when I'm away from the office." Ramirez took the notebook, noting the neat handwriting and the detailed entries. Each page reflected a person meticulous and methodical, someone who valued order and precision. Ramirez's mind wandered briefly as he thought about the responsibility the driver must carry. The notebook wasn't just for appointments. It contained notes about cases, decisions, and perhaps even lives that depended on the judgments written within. This wasn't just a citizen. This was a person who held a position of significant authority, someone whose daily choices impacted others in profound ways. Ramirez felt a renewed sense of respect and a little awe. He had seen many people in positions of power, but there was something quietly commanding about this individual that didn't rely on loud statements or gestures. The driver noticed Ramirez's careful observation and smiled faintly, though his expression remained composed. "I understand why you might have been concerned," he said. "It's been a long night, and situations like this can easily be misunderstood." Ramirez appreciated the honesty and the lack of judgment in those words. The driver was calm, yet he acknowledged the officer's role, the responsibility Ramirez carried to protect the community. It was a brief moment of mutual understanding between two people who were both bound by rules, but in very different ways. Ramirez took a deep breath, letting the tension from the earlier moments ease slightly. He knew he had to maintain professionalism, but he also recognized the importance of human connection, even in brief encounters. He nodded. "Thank you for understanding. I just need to verify some details before letting you go." The driver nodded in agreement, sliding his notebook back onto the passenger seat while keeping his hands visible. Ramirez made the call to dispatch, reading the driver's information carefully and confirming his identity. Moments like this could feel routine, but Ramirez knew that every interaction had layers, and he approached it with care as the verification process unfolded. Ramirez couldn't help but observe the environment around him. The convenience store remained dark and quiet, the street lamp casting long shadows across the pavement. The city seemed to sleep, yet there was a sense of life hidden just out of sight, faint sounds of distant traffic. The occasional flutter of leaves and the hum of electricity from nearby buildings Ramirez's senses were tuned to detect any irregularity, any sudden movement, but nothing appeared threatening. The driver remained still, patient, waiting for the verification to complete. Finally, dispatch confirmed the identity of the driver. Ramirez felt a mixture of relief and humility. He had approached the situation with caution, assuming the worst based on prior information, but now it was clear that he had misjudged. The driver was indeed a judge, a respected figure in the legal system, and completely innocent of any wrongdoing. Ramirez's heart rate began to normalize, and he felt a sense of calm return. This encounter had been a test of observation, patience, and professionalism, and he had navigated it successfully, though not without a few internal misgivings about his initial assumptions. The judge, aware of the verification, thanked Ramirez for taking the time to ensure the situation was handled correctly. "I appreciate your diligence," he said. "It's important to be thorough, even when things seem obvious." Ramirez nodded, understanding the layers of meaning behind the statement. The judge recognized the balance between caution and fairness, between duty and human understanding. It was a subtle lesson, but one that Ramirez absorbed fully. Reflecting on his own approach to law enforcement and human interaction, they stood there for a moment. Two people from different worlds, connected briefly by circumstance and duty. Ramirez observed the way the judge carried himself, the quiet confidence, the composed posture, and the calm expression. He realized that authority didn't always need to be loud or forceful. Sometimes it was simply the way a person held themselves, the steadiness in their actions, and the thoughtfulness in their words. It was a powerful reminder for Ramirez, who often dealt with people in moments of fear or crisis. That strength could come in many forms. As the night continued, Ramirez and the judge exchanged a few more words about routine procedures and the importance of careful observation. The conversation was polite and professional, but it carried a human warmth, a recognition that both were individuals performing their duties to the best of their abilities. Ramirez felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that each encounter, no matter how small or brief, contributed to his growth as an officer and as a person. The judge's calm presence had turned a potentially tense situation into a meaningful exchange, one that left a lasting impression. Finally, Ramirez stepped back and gave a polite nod. "Thank you for your cooperation. You're free to go?" The judge nodded in return, smiling faintly, and drove off slowly, merging back into the quiet city streets. Ramirez watched until the car disappeared from view, then took a deep breath and returned to his cruiser. The night had been anything but ordinary. It had begun with suspicion and tension, but it ended with a lesson in humility, patience, and respect. Ramirez reflected on the interaction, aware that assumptions could be misleading, but careful observation and a calm approach could reveal the truth and create a positive outcome as he resumed his patrol. The city felt different somehow, more alive in its quietness. Ramirez's thoughts lingered on the judge, on the human qualities that had made the encounter memorable. He considered how often people were judged unfairly, how assumptions could shape perceptions, and how important it was to approach each situation with empathy and care. The night had reminded him that even in a world of rules, procedures, and responsibilities, there was always room for understanding, patience. In recognition of the human element that connected everyone in unexpected ways, the patrol continued, with Ramirez more attentive than before, not just to potential threats, but to the subtle signs of humanity around him. The encounter had been a momentary pause in the rhythm of the city, a chance to see the world from a slightly different perspective. He knew that nights like this were rare, and yet the lessons they carried could last a lifetime. He drove on, the streetlights casting long shadows across the empty roads, carrying with him a story of caution, respect, and the unexpected lessons that come from even the simplest human interactions. After the judge drove away, Officer Ramirez sat in his cruiser for a few moments, processing everything that had just happened. The night felt even quieter now, almost surreal, as if the city had paused to let him reflect on the encounter. He leaned back in his seat and took a deep breath, thinking about how easily assumptions could cloud judgment. The tension of the night hadn't completely left him. Instead, it had transformed into a mixture of relief, humility, and curiosity about the unexpected turn of events. Ramirez thought about how quickly he had jumped to conclusions. Seeing a car parked oddly in the shadows, noticing the slight movements of the driver's hands, he had immediately assumed the worst. His training had taught him to be cautious, and his instincts had kicked in automatically. But in hindsight, he realized that he hadn't taken a moment to consider other possibilities. The driver hadn't acted suspiciously beyond normal human movement. Yet Ramirez's mind had filled in the blanks with the story of a potential criminal. He shook his head slightly, acknowledging the lesson in humility that the night had handed him so abruptly. He started the cruiser and drove slowly along the streets, his eyes scanning every corner and shadow, but now with a different perspective. The city had always been a place of unpredictability, and Ramirez knew that his job required both vigilance and understanding. He thought about the judge, a person of authority, responsibility, and calm confidence, and realized that even those who seemed out of place or mysterious might have reasons rooted in responsibility, not wrongdoing. The encounter reminded him that perception was fragile and assumptions could be misleading. As Ramirez continued his patrol, his mind wandered to the broader implications of the night. He had interacted with countless people during his career: drivers pulled over for minor infractions, citizens in distress, and individuals in high-stress situations. Each encounter taught him something new, yet he realized that he often approached situations with preconceptions that could cloud judgment. This night was a clear reminder that empathy and patience were as important as vigilance. He needed to see people as individuals, not as threats defined by circumstances or appearances. He drove past the streets where the city lights reflected softly on wet pavement from an earlier drizzle, the reflections stretching across the asphalt like faint trails of light. The city was alive in subtle ways, a cat darting across an alley, the faint hum of air conditioners from distant buildings, and the occasional flicker of neon signs from businesses still open late. Ramirez felt a renewed appreciation for the quiet rhythm of the city at night, a rhythm that allowed him to reflect not just on the work he did, but on the human stories hidden behind every door and window. A few blocks ahead, Ramirez noticed a group of people gathered outside a small diner. Their laughter and chatter were faint but distinct, reminding him of normal life continuing even amidst the uncertainty of the night. He smiled slightly, realizing that life was a mixture of ordinary moments and unexpected encounters, much like the one he had just experienced. The judge had appeared in his night without warning, altering the course of events and leaving a lasting impression. Ramirez understood that these small, fleeting interactions were what shaped his understanding of people, of authority, and of trust. He thought about the judge's calm demeanor once more, how it contrasted sharply with the assumptions he had made. There was a quiet power in composure, in patience, and in clear communication. The judge had managed the situation without raising his voice, without making abrupt movements, yet had conveyed authority and confidence effortlessly. Ramirez reflected on how often he had seen people panic, react defensively, or misinterpret the intentions of others. In contrast, this encounter had shown him the strength and restraint and measured action as he drove on. Ramirez replayed the sequence of moments in his mind: the first sight of the car, the approach, the tension, the request for identification, and finally, the revelation. Each step had been charged with expectation and assumption, yet each step had also been a learning opportunity. He realized that his role as an officer was not only to enforce the law, but also to navigate human interactions with care and understanding. Every judgment he made had consequences, and every assumption could affect someone's life. Even if just briefly, Ramirez remembered the subtle expressions of the judge, of the faint smile, the deliberate movements, the calm voice, and how they had conveyed honesty and transparency. It struck him that so much of human interaction relied on these small cues that could easily be misread under stress. He considered how often people were judged unfairly, and how important it was to remain observant without jumping to conclusions. The night had reinforced his belief that good judgment combined both vigilance and empathy. As he rounded another corner, Ramirez's thoughts returned to the quiet streets and the stillness of the city. The night had a rhythm, a steady pulse that matched his own contemplative mood. He reflected on the responsibility he carried, not just for enforcing the law, but for understanding the context of every situation he encountered. He recognized that his assumptions had been shaped by prior information, a stolen car report, then that while his caution was warranted, it had led him to misinterpret an innocent situation. This awareness was humbling. It had strengthened his commitment to approach each encounter with balance and care. Driving past the dimly lit park, Ramirez noticed the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional distant call of a night bird. The city seemed to breathe around him, a living organism of routines and surprises. He realized that his encounter with the judge was not just a singular event, but a reflection of the unpredictability of human life. People often appeared in ways that didn't immediately make sense. It was his duty to navigate those appearances thoughtfully and respectfully. He felt grateful for the lesson, understanding that even routine patrols could bring profound insights about human behavior and judgment. Ramirez thought about how he would recount this story in his own mind later, perhaps even sharing it with colleagues. It wasn't about embarrassment or mistake. It was about learning. It's about recognizing the complexity of human interaction and about understanding the subtle balance between vigilance and empathy. He considered the judge's perspective, imagining how it felt to be in a situation where assumptions were made against him without knowing the full context. This reflection deepened Ramirez's awareness of fairness, respect, and patience in his own work. The remainder of the night continued with the usual quiet patrol, but Ramirez moved with a different sense of attentiveness. He noticed small details more acutely, the way shadows shifted, the faint glimmer of headlights in the distance, and the rhythm of the city's quieter corners. His mind remained alert, yet it was also reflective, absorbing the lessons from the earlier encounter. He felt a sense of connection to the city and to the people who inhabited it. Understanding that every encounter, whether tense or ordinary, carried an opportunity to learn and grow, he drove past the familiar neighborhoods, thinking about the families sleeping peacefully, the late-night workers returning home, and the lone pedestrians navigating the streets. Each person had a story, circumstances that were invisible from the outside, and Ramirez recognized that his assumptions could never capture the full picture. The judge had been a stark reminder of that truth. Appearances could deceive, but careful observation, patience, and human understanding could reveal the reality beneath. As dawn began to hint at the horizon, the city slowly shifted from night to early morning. Ramirez felt a sense of closure for the night's events, carrying with him the subtle yet powerful lessons of the evening. He realized that his experience with the judge was more than a routine stop-it, was a lesson in humility, human behavior, and the responsibility of judgment. It reminded him that even in a world governed by rules and procedures, there was always space for empathy, understanding, and respect for the unexpected complexities of human life. By the time he returned to the precinct, Ramirez felt a renewed sense of purpose. The encounter had reinforced his commitment to careful observation, to treating people fairly, and to acknowledging the limits of his own assumptions. He knew that this night would remain with him, a quiet story of caution, respect, and the human side of law enforcement. It was a reminder that every encounter mattered, and that even the briefest moments could carry lessons that lasted a lifetime. The early hours of the morning were quiet, almost too quiet, as Officer Ramirez continued his patrol through the city's streets. The tension from the previous encounter with the parked car and the driver who had turned out to be a judge still lingered in his mind. It wasn't the fear that stayed with him, but a sharp awareness of how quickly assumptions could cloud judgment. Ramirez had learned over the years that every moment on the street carried potential, and every person he interacted with had a story hidden beneath appearances as he drove slowly. He thought about the events of the night. The judge had displayed an uncommon calm. His presence had made Ramirez reflect on the qualities that commanded respect without demanding it. The experience had taught him that authority and composure were not always about making noise or asserting dominance. They could be quiet, subtle, and deeply human. Ramirez felt a sense of gratitude for the encounter. Understanding that it had offered a rare lesson in humility, he passed a small park where a single streetlight flickered, casting long shadows over the wet grass from the earlier drizzle. Ramirez noticed a man sitting on a bench, head down, perhaps lost in thought. The officer slowed his cruiser for a moment, watching the scene. The park was empty except for the figure, and the faint sound of water dripping from the trees created a gentle rhythm. Ramirez realized that each person he saw, each scenario he encountered, could carry unseen layers of meaning. The man on the bench might be dealing with challenges Ramirez would never know about. This thought reminded him again of the importance of patience and careful observation. As he drove on, Ramirez thought about his own reaction to the judge earlier. He had approached the car ready for confrontation, expecting criminal activity. Every movement of the driver had been scrutinized, every slight shift interpreted through the lens of suspicion. And yet, when the truth emerged, Ramirez had felt relief mixed with embarrassment. It was a lesson that even experienced officers could misjudge a situation when preconceptions overshadowed reality. He reminded himself that the job required constant reflection and self-awareness. Ramirez's cruiser rolled past quiet streets lined with row houses, the soft glow from windows illuminating the sidewalks. In some homes, lights were still on, revealing figures preparing for the day ahead. He noticed a woman sweeping her porch, an elderly man watering plants, and a young person hurrying to catch the early bus. Each scene reminded him of the diverse lives that intersected with his patrol. And he felt a renewed sense of responsibility to approach every encounter with care and respect. He thought about the judge's demeanor again, so composed, so deliberate in every action. It struck him that confidence was as much about self-awareness as it was about skill or authority. The judge had controlled the situation without aggression, maintaining clarity and calm while allowing Ramirez to fulfill his role without embarrassment. It was a masterclass in subtle authority, and Ramirez knew it was a quality he wanted to emulate, both on and off duty, as the city slowly began to wake. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional shout of early risers began to fill the air. Ramirez continued to patrol, but now with a reflective mindset. He thought about all the times assumptions could lead to misunderstanding. People misread because of appearance, posture, or even a fleeting glance. This night had reinforced the importance of patience, observation, and the human element in every interaction. It was not enough to rely solely on training and instinct. He had to combine those with empathy and careful consideration. Ramirez recalled the way he had approached the car earlier, the caution and precision with which he had moved. In the rush of adrenaline that had surged when he thought the driver might be involved in a crime, the relief he felt upon discovering the truth was palpable, but it was accompanied by a subtle sting of humility. He realized that every encounter carried the risk of misinterpretation, and that acknowledging mistakes and learning from them was a sign of professionalism, not weakness. Driving past a dimly lit diner, Ramirez noticed the early morning staff preparing for the day. The smell of brewing coffee and fresh bread seemed to reach him even as he drove slowly by. It was a simple, ordinary scene, yet it contrasted sharply with the tension-filled moments from earlier. Life went on, and yet the lessons from the night remained vivid in his mind. He thought about the human stories hidden in each window he passed, each person he saw, and how easily he could misjudge based on surface appearances alone. The officer's thoughts turned to the broader implications of his encounter. His job was more than enforcement, it was about understanding, reading situations accurately, and responding appropriately. The judge had reminded him that respect and authority could coexist without confrontation, that composure and patience could diffuse tension before it escalated. Ramirez reflected on how these principles could guide him in future interactions, both on duty and in his personal life. He remembered the subtle details, the way the driver's eyes followed him, the steady position of his hands, the calm tone in his voice. Each element had communicated truth, and each had been a cue for Ramirez to observe carefully rather than assume. It was a lesson that would shape his approach moving forward, reinforcing the need to pay attention to nuance and context in every encounter. The streets gradually brightened as the first rays of sun touched the city. Ramirez felt a sense of closure for the night, knowing that while the tension had passed, the insights would remain. He reflected on the judge's patience and the way he had handled the situation with dignity. It reminded Ramirez that authority was not just about power, but about understanding, communication, and integrity. He carried this thought with him, feeling a renewed sense of purpose in his role as an officer. By the time Ramirez returned to the precinct, the city was coming alive with morning activity. People were walking to work, children were heading to school, and the familiar sounds of a waking city filled the air. Ramirez parked his cruiser, stepped out, and stretched, feeling the weight of the night lift from his shoulders. The encounter with the judge had been brief, but it left a lasting impression. It reinforced the lessons of humility, patience, and careful observation. Reminding him that every interaction mattered, Ramirez walked into the precinct. Greeted by the quiet buzz of early morning staff preparing for the day, he felt a sense of calm satisfaction, knowing that the night had tested his instincts, patience, and judgment. It had been a night that began with suspicion and tension, but ended with reflection, growth, and a deeper understanding of the human side of his work. The story of the parked car and the driver would stay with him, not as a tale of danger, but as a lesson in perception, authority, and empathy. The early morning light streamed through the windows. Casting long shadows across the precinct floor, Ramirez sat at his desk for a moment, sipping coffee and letting his thoughts settle. He considered the unpredictability of his job, the moments when life threw unexpected challenges his way, and the importance of meeting those challenges with clarity, patience, and understanding. The judge had unknowingly taught him a lesson in composure, and Ramirez knew he would carry it forward, shaping how he approached every situation, every person, and every choice in the hours and years to come. The day had fully begun, and the city was alive with movement. Yet Officer Ramirez couldn't shake the reflection of the night's events. The encounter with the driver, the person he had initially assumed to be a criminal, had left a mark on him that went beyond routine patrol experiences. It had been more than just a misunderstanding. It had been a profound lesson in perception, patience, and human behavior. Ramirez sat in his cruiser outside the precinct, sipping his coffee as he reviewed the details of the night in his mind. He thought about the initial tension, the way his instincts had kicked in, how quickly he had interpreted the situation as dangerous. Every movement, every shadow, every flicker of the headlights had been scrutinized through a lens of suspicion. And yet, the reality had been completely different. The driver had been calm, composed, and entirely innocent. Ramirez felt a mixture of relief and humility. He realized that no amount of experience could completely shield him from the assumptions he might make in a split second. He thought about the judge and the qualities that had set him apart: quiet confidence, measured movements, and a calm presence. These traits had communicated truth and honesty without a single aggressive word or action. Ramirez reflected on how powerful subtlety could be. The judge had handled the situation in a way that allowed both of them to fulfill their roles without conflict. It was a reminder that authority and respect could exist without confrontation. A lesson that would stay with Ramirez for a long time, driving through the streets as the morning traffic began to increase. Ramirez felt a renewed awareness of his surroundings. He noticed the early commuters, people walking their dogs and children heading to school. He thought about how easily he could misinterpret these ordinary moments if he were not careful. The night had reminded him that appearances could be misleading and that patience and careful observation were essential in understanding people's intentions and circumstances. Ramirez recalled the exact moment when he realized who the driver was. The weight of expectation had been heavy, his pulse quickening as he approached the car. But when the badge came into view, the tension dissolved instantly, replaced by a humbling realization. It wasn't just relief. It was a clear acknowledgement that humans are complex and that split-second judgments can never capture the full story. He recognized that his responsibility as an officer was not only to enforce the law, but also to navigate these human complexities. With care and respect, he parked near a small cafe and watched the city awaken around him. The world seemed ordinary, yet every corner carried hidden stories. Ramirez reflected on the many people he would interact with during his shift, each with their own context, each with details invisible at first glance. The judge had reminded him of the importance of empathy, of understanding that each person's actions had reasons beyond what was immediately visible. This understanding was now a guiding principle for him, influencing how he approached each interaction. Ramirez thought about the moments leading up to the revelation, the driver's calm movements, the careful explanation, and the respect shown despite being mistakenly suspected. It struck him that dignity and composure could have a profound effect on those around them. He realized that he could take this lesson into his own life, not just in policing but in personal interactions, understanding that patience and calmness often diffused tension and created trust. The city streets were busier now, but Ramirez felt a sense of clarity. The encounter with the judge had transformed his perspective, making him more conscious of the subtleties in human behavior. He considered how easy it would have been to escalate the situation if either party had acted differently. The night had been a reminder that careful observation, empathy, and controlled response were crucial in preventing misunderstandings and fostering positive outcomes. He drove past familiar neighborhoods and reflected on his own growth. The officer realized that even seasoned professionals could misjudge situations when preconceptions overshadowed reality. The experience had humbled him, reinforcing the importance of self-reflection and continual learning. Ramirez felt grateful for the lesson, knowing it would influence his decisions, his judgments, and his interactions for years to come. Stopping at a quiet intersection, Ramirez thought about the broader implications of the night. Law enforcement was about more than enforcing rules. It was about understanding people, seeing beyond surface appearances, and balancing vigilance with empathy. The judge had modeled a form of authority that was instructive, teaching Ramirez that strength could be gentle, composed, and effective without aggression. This realization resonated deeply with him. He recalled the final moments of the encounter, the polite words exchanged, the acknowledgement of effort and diligence, and the unspoken respect that had passed between them. These moments, though brief, had carried weight and meaning. Ramirez recognized that every interaction, no matter how fleeting, had the potential to shape understanding and build trust. It was a subtle reminder that human connections mattered, even in professional settings governed by rules and procedures. As he continued patrolling, Ramirez thought about how he would carry this lesson forward. He considered the power of patience, careful observation, and measured response. He reflected on the importance of humility, recognizing that even the most trained and experienced officers could be wrong in their assumptions. The night had reinforced the need to approach every situation with a balance of vigilance and empathy. Ramirez stopped briefly to observe a small group of early morning joggers. He noticed the way they interacted, their gestures and expressions, and felt a sense of connection to the human stories around him. The night's events had heightened his awareness, making him more attuned to the nuances of human behavior. Every glance, every movement, every subtle expression could reveal much more than words alone. Driving past the quiet park where the encounter began, Ramirez reflected on how the same place could carry different meanings depending on context and perception. The car, the driver, and the situation had seemed threatening at first, but understanding the full picture transformed it into a lesson in judgment and empathy. Ramirez realized that perspective was everything, and careful observation could uncover truth where assumptions often failed. By mid-morning, Ramirez returned to the precinct, feeling a sense of closure. The city had shifted from the tense, quiet hours of the night to the bustling energy of daytime. He parked his cruiser, stepped out, and took a moment to reflect. The encounter with the driver had been brief, but its impact was lasting. It had taught him about humility, perception, patience, the subtle power of human composure. Ramirez walked into the precinct, greeted by the familiar sounds of colleagues preparing for the day. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the night's lessons would guide him in future encounters. The story of the parked car and the driver would remain with him, not as a tale of tension or danger, but as a reminder of the complexity of human behavior and the importance of approaching every situation with empathy, patience, and careful observation. Sitting at his desk, Ramirez reviewed his notes and considered how he would carry this experience forward. It was a night that began with suspicion and tension, but ended with reflection, understanding, and personal growth. He knew that every interaction mattered, and that the lessons learned from even a single encounter could influence the way he saw the world, the people around him, and himself. The encounter had been a rare and valuable reminder of the human side of law enforcement, one that Ramirez would carry with him for the rest of his career. As the day went on and the city hummed with life, Ramirez remained mindful of the lessons from the night. Each person he met, each situation he encountered, could carry hidden complexity and unseen depth. He had learned that appearances could be misleading, and that patience, empathy, and careful observation were essential tools in navigating the unpredictable landscape of human life. The night's events had reinforced his commitment to understanding, fairness, and respect, shaping him not just as an officer, but as a person navigating the world with awareness and humility.